Good evening. Good evening. I'd like to call this special meeting of the University Heights City Council to order. For the record, today is Monday, March 26, 2018. Ms. Thomas, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Bott?
Here.
Mr. Wiseman?
Here.
Mr. Stones?
Here.
Mrs. Pardee?
Here.
Mr. Erdl?
Here.
Mrs. Cameron?
Here.
Mrs. Wise?
Here.
All who are able, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I don't think so. I don't know.
They still,
Do they?
Being a special meeting, we have a shortened agenda, and we go immediately into the agenda items. The first item is Ordinance 2018-17, the 2018 budget being taken up on second reading per the agenda. Although per a discussion I had with our law director, we may want to move to amend to make that a second reading and on emergency, which Mr. McConville, I think, can more fully explain if you would do so.
The discussion we had was that we want to make sure that we have monies appropriated immediately, and that we not have any sort of gap in time with respect to the temporary appropriations ordinance and the appropriations that are made in this ordinance. And so that in order to avoid that risk, we would pass on emergency, since an emergency ordinance takes effect immediately. You're not waiving the two reading rule. This is your second reading, but you are passing in a way that makes sure that all monies are appropriated so that all expenditures are thereby valid.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any discussion on this agenda item?
Mayor?
Yes, please.
Well, I would like to see if the finance director would like to say anything about this budget.
I think this is a good budget. It includes a new police officer, a new fireman, video streaming, a bunch of equipment, an economic development employee, a communications, civic engagement coordinator, a new admin assistant, and raises for non-union employees. We've kind of gone through it, we vetted it, and I feel that this is a good budget.
Thank you. I also want to say that this budget reflects a lot of discussion, a lot of digging in during meetings, but it does reflect the mayor's wish for the administration and vision for the city, especially as he outlined it, as he campaigned and was elected to this position to implement. So we are implementing the budget that reflects that vision. At base, we have total general fund expenditures in this budget of $16,385,952. Total all funds and expenses of $23,255,086. That is what we are voting on tonight, and I would like to move the approval of the 2018 budget as recommended by the Finance Committee of Council and presented tonight on emergency.
Second.
We have a motion by Mrs. Pardee, a second by Mrs. Weiss. Is there any discussion on this motion? Well, before we take the roll, I would just like to add that the budget was the work and culmination of a lot of people in the Finance Department, certainly on the Finance Committee, certainly Mrs. Pardee, Mrs. Weiss, and almost, I think everybody up here has at one point or another weighed in on the budget. All the directors, the chiefs, well, the interim fire chief, the now retired police chief, all spoke on behalf of the various departments, went over their needs, went over their wishes, and we tried to strike a balance. giving people certainly what they need and giving departments certainly what they need, but also going part of the way at least to moving towards the vision of where we want our departments to be. We won't get there in 1 year, but there are things that that we can be very happy about, I think, with this budget. I know that I'm happy about, and I'm very gratified by the process, by the professionalism and thoroughness by the people involved in it, and I want to thank everyone who attended one of these meetings or was in any way part of the process. Too many, really, for me to try to name here. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Wiseman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to belabor the point, but we've met almost once a week since the beginning of the year on this budget. We spent a lot of time on it, more time than we have in years past. This is the first year that we've heard directly from the department heads about what their needs were, what their visions were, what they needed, not only in terms of personnel, but in terms of equipment. In years past, we got a number for the administration and spent our time trying to figure out what the number meant, whether it was justifiable, what it stood for. I think it shouldn't go unnoticed by the citizens, the transparency that we've experienced in the last couple of months and the amount of inquiry and the amount of input we've had from not only the department heads, but for the administration and each other. And for my money, this is I think the new administration deserves the chance to implement the vision that the mayor ran on and that the mayor convinced most of the people in the city that he thought was good for the city and a good direction to go. And I'm proud that we're able to implement those things. It's a lot different than budgets than we've had in years past, but I have every faith and every belief that this will end up being good for the city, and it's going to be a great process and a good budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wiseman. If there is nothing further, then Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll, please? Oh, I'm sorry. First, on the suspension of the rule.
We're
Oh,
not
no.
suspending the reading rule.
Oh, okay, we don't have to call that
This
then.
is the second reading, it's just that it's on emergency.
Okay, so it's a single vote when it's second reading on emergency?
Correct.
Okay, very good. Thank you for the clarification.
Okay.
So then, as to the main motion, Mrs. Thomas?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Erdl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is ordinance 2018-16, amending codified ordinance section 212.01 entitled Advertising Requirements and Bids, and ordinance 212.03 entitled Execution and Approval for the purpose of increasing the mayor's spending authority. This is on second reading, and again, after consulting with the law director, perhaps he can elaborate, should also then be taken up on emergency. And Mr. McConville, if you would so explain.
In this instance, there's been a request by the fire chief to the mayor for an expenditure, and I don't recall what the specific expenditure is for, but it's one that needs to be made immediately, I believe.
Yes, it's for repairs to the engine of the fire truck. The estimate is around $11,000. This is, we're in an interesting spot in that I forwarded everyone on council the estimate about an hour ago. I got it this morning. I've been out all day sick, so I was doing some things by email, but not, I would have gotten it to you sooner. So, but in any oh, I'm sorry.
Well, what I was going to say is, again, if, in order for the mayor to make that expenditure, the ordinance would have to be passed on emergency, because if it's not passed on emergency, then this spending authority that's enacted by this ordinance does not go into effect for 30 days. If it's on emergency, then it goes into effect immediately. So again, you're not waiving the two reading rule, because this is your second reading, but you would be adding, amending to have it on emergency, the emergency being the need to make these expenditures immediately.
Mr. Wiseman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to be clear, we're not making this legislative change because the fire engine needs fixed.
No.
We had considered this already. It had been read once. Generally speaking, we're just doing an emergency so the mayor can purchase the $11,000, whatever it is, the next day. But we had considered this already. We're going to pass it tonight regardless of whether the fire truck broke.
Well, presumably. I mean, I didn't want to presume passage, but I was certainly hopeful of it. And the difference here is because this is a special meeting, we couldn't just add the fire truck repair to the agenda on this short notice. We could call another special meeting, we could wait a week and do it at the next meeting, or we could do this. So
I just wanted to.
my suggestion was to do this
I just
after.
wanted to clarify
Okay.
the nature of this ordinance and the fact that it just happens to lay up like this, as opposed to just for this particular purchase. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Mayor, may I?
Yes, please.
This ordinance, again, comes from a recommendation from the Finance Committee of Council. The Finance Committee and the Finance Advisory Committee met, and at the end of the budget meeting, did discuss increasing the mayor's spending authority, and it was a recommendation. So this was vetted earlier by our finance group. We talked about several numbers and decided that this was the best number because at $15,000, the mayor must go out for public bid for anything that he chooses to or is interested in purchasing. So $15,000 was the threshold. The reason we did this also is because we have a very transparent situation now with the administration. We are informed of what it is that the mayor is purchasing, what his plans are, what his vision is, what he's working on. So we felt that we could go to this higher level of spending authority.
Thank you, Mrs. Pardee. Does anybody have anything else?
I'm sorry, what's the code section again?
Oh, there are two. There's 212.01 and 212.03.
Thank you.
And while Councilman Weissman is looking that up, I'd like to make a motion to approve ordinance 2018-16 on emergency. Excuse me.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion by Mrs. Pardee to approve the resolution on emergency, a second by Mrs. Cameron. And we'll wait a moment while.
Well, I'll just make a
Okay,
statement.
Mr. Sims, go ahead.
Councilman Wiseman was really responding to a question that I presented to him. I think it's important for the public to understand that the increase that we are considering this evening is also because of the fact that the existing level of $5,000, which is the mayor's spending authority, has not been amended for about 20 years.
I think 30,
30 years,
88,
88?
yeah, June of 88, I looked it up.
So it hasn't been amended for 30 years. Most other communities have long gone to higher spending authorities for their mayors.
Thank you, Mr. Sims.
As long as we can all agree what 15,000 means, it will be fine.
I got a pretty good idea. Thank you, Mr. Wiseman. Does anybody else have anything? Okay, we have a motion pending then, and Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Erdl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron? Aye. Mr. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, very good. With there being no other business itemized on this agenda, a motion to adjourn at this juncture would be in order.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Wiseman, second by Mrs. Weiss. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron? Aye. Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Thank you all for coming this evening.